Good Tuesday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille Show. Thank you for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, across Albemarle County, Central Virginia, the Commonwealth and the world, on the I Love CVille Network. Thank you to the good doctor, Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine, for being a part of the network. And folks, changing people's lives at Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine. Who's got your back? Dr. Wagner's got your back. Of course, Ting Fiber Internet. Ting Fiber Internet powers the show, the best internet in Charlottesville, and it's not even close. Crazy fast internet. Crazy fast internet. Ting Fiber Internet. A lot we're going to cover on this show. For the first 40 minutes, we're going to spend time with Scott Elliff. This, a household name now. A household name from the Forest Lakes Neighborhood Association. We're going to ask him some questions. We're going to take your questions. We see the media is watching the show as we speak. In the 1 o'clock hour between 1:10 and 1:15, we'll talk financial markets with Alex Urpí, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. Lumber is starting to stabilize, we believe, now under $1,000 per 1,000 feet. Home builder sentiment is dropping a little bit, and we got some PPP news to get out, and of course BlackRock, a global hedge fund, now getting into the home ownership game. But without further ado, Judah Wickower, let's welcome a gentleman that I think needs no introduction, Scott Elliff. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Well, good afternoon. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you as well. Last time we talked, it was virtual. Today, it is in person, and it is so much better. I'm going to get out of your way. You're in front of the Planning Commission today, I believe, 6 o'clock.
That's right.
Set the stage for us, please.
Well, it's not just me. It's our whole association of Forest Lakes, and for that matter, Hollymead, which is about 6,000 people and about 2,000 houses. And so we've been involved in the past and fairly active just in trying to prevent and preserve our communities. And we've got a new development on the corner of Ashwood and 29 that's been proposed, and to our mind it's really dense and would cause us a bunch of problems. And so we've been making our voices heard, which is, as you say, that's the way it's done.
That's local government. That's local government.
Yeah.
Hollymead and Forest Lakes communities comprise 2,000 plus rooftops, 6,000 plus residents. Let's talk about the project.
Right. Well, it used to be an old trailer park. You could actually hardly see it because it was so surrounded by trees and everything, and it had been really run down. So it was bought probably most of 2 years ago or so. And out of the blue, we saw a proposal for redeveloping it. And it was just really dense the first way you looked at it. It was 4- and 5-story buildings, rows and rows of townhouses, really close to all corners and so forth. And it just didn't feel right to us. So we tried to start getting some engagement and some commentary, and it's really evolved quite a bit in terms of our level of analysis. We had 30 people involved at the Planning Commission in March, each giving a substantive 3-minute discussion with a slideshow and with analysis that we both did and paid for with outside firms. So it's way beyond the usual sort of democracy in action where somebody kind of generally mumbles that they don't like it or it's in their backyard or something like that. This was very principled, very organized, very detailed, and so forth. It just has a lot of issues.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting there. Talk to me about the developer.
Right. Developer is called RST. Apparently he's a pretty well-known guy in the Southeast for doing multifamily housing. I believe this is his first entree to Charlottesville, and maybe a little shock to him in Charlottesville in Albemarle in terms of how it works.
Organized, you guys are.
Well, the extent of community involvement and how much we care passionately about our local area.
RST and their level of engagement with Hollymead and Forest Lakes, how do you characterize it?
Very low, actually. We never heard anything from them except the proposal that they made. We tried to reach out, not very successfully at the beginning. So we realized when it did come to the Planning Commission in March that we had to really kind of lay it all out in great detail. And we did, as I mentioned. Since then, the Planning Commission said they deferred it, or rather the developer asked for a deferral because they saw a lot of the writing on the wall, I think, and a lot of unanswered questions and so forth. And they basically said to the developer that he ought to work with the community. We never heard from him after that, though. He has proposed again, and I think I'll talk about a couple of things he's done that are commendable, that go in the right direction, but other things that are worse, and a lot of things that are really, unchanged. When we didn't hear from him after all that time, we actually put together a small group and reached out and had a meeting trying to see if there was a way that we could get to yes on this thing. It just didn't get very far.
RST, they're in front of the Planning Commission in March.
Correct.
back in front of the Planning Commission in June. Are you surprised the turnaround was this quickly?
I really am, given the range of issues that we presented. Now, can it be done in that time period? I suppose, but the proof is in the pudding, and what you see was something that's changed, modestly in a few areas, but not substantially, and didn't really get at the guts of the issue. Look, we're not opposed to redeveloping this site. But it's got to be done responsibly. It's got to be done at the appropriate scale. It's got to be consistent with the local neighborhoods and not cause problems for the residents that have been there living happily and paying their taxes for the last 20 years.
RST and their level of community engagement you've characterized. Can you compare and contrast Brook Hill and its level of community engagement to what RST has done?
Brook Hill was much more engaged with us. Now, they're a builder and they want to get their project through and they want to make money and so forth. But we had a fairly open dialogue with them. They made a few changes that we wanted, one or two things that that we didn't get, but that's sort of the way it is normally, I suppose. But it was a lot easier to kind of work with them. The developer of that also did a Willow Grove, which is kind of an infill development in Forest Lakes, and that worked out pretty well. For example, we've always been concerned with developers when they come in and clear cut the land that causes erosion and goes into our lakes. We are Forest Lakes, after all. We own those lakes. And you may remember some years ago, the development of Hollymead Town Center substantially silted in our lakes and caused huge long-run problems for us that I'm not sure we can even ever fix. So we've been very attuned to that along the way. Well, with the Brook Hill developer, they appointed somebody to be the day-to-day person to watch the construction process and the siltation and to make sure that they were always mitigating and so forth. And they had regular meetings with us. I thought it was a fairly healthy relationship, and I think it worked out pretty well.
How is RST's plan improved March versus now?
Right. In a couple of areas to some extent. One is that they made it less visually intrusive when you first come onto Ashwood Boulevard. So they redesigned it to move some buildings further back, to increase the buffers there and so forth. And also reduced some of the density of the townhouse element of it, because it kind of overhangs and overlooks a little subdivision called Ashland, a little bit confusing, that's right next to it on the northern edge, which is very low-slung two-story townhouses, and they were going to put four-story buildings kind of pretty close to the property line, et cetera, and kind of overhang them. So they've made a few adjustments there, increased the tree buffer on that side, still kind of modest, but at least better. So, those are steps in the right direction. Now we're still waiting to see like a computer-generated picture of what it would look like along Ashwood. We generated one when we did our analysis. It wasn't perfect, but gave you the feel for it, and it was incredibly shocking what the thing looked like based on their first round of development, and that got everybody pretty energized. But I think to confirm that it really will look okay, they've committed to doing an updated photo like that. We just haven't seen it yet, so I hope they'll follow through.
How's it worse?
Well, it's worse because they reduced some of the density on that part and just tacked it onto the apartment buildings that they have on the other part. Three-story buildings became four-story buildings. And they still don't want to have set step backs, they call it, which makes it a little bit more visually less intrusive, basically, from the road or from the other side of the property or so forth. So we pointed out that there was an awful lot of units, and all those units would cause traffic on Ashwood, and we'll get to that as a complete separate issue.
That's my next question.
Yeah, but if you take some of them away from the townhouses and just add them on by stacking up more units on the apartment side, and everything in that development is still going to flow onto Ashwood, then you haven't done anything. You've rearranged a few deck chairs and so forth. Now, I get it. The builder wants to make money, and money depends largely on the number of units. But if the point was density and size, and you keep the density the same and increase the size and continue to have the same level of units, basically 10% less, and still have the same traffic, then you haven't addressed the core problem.
332 units.
That's it.
RST.
Yes.
Their projection is a little less than 2 cars a unit.
Yeah.
600 cars projection.
That would be
RSTs.
I don't know if that's theirs. That's a probably pretty good rule of thumb.
Back of the napkin estimate.
Yeah, back of the napkin.
An additional 600 vehicles in 29 North Hollymead Forest Lakes, the impact, Scott.
Well, don't forget that part of Brook Hill units are going to come north to Ashwood to access the stoplight to go south to Ashwood, to 29 South. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't sort of conceptualize, that, you think about your own traffic pattern. Sometimes, if you're trying to go south, sometimes you'll go a block north if you can get on a high-speed road sooner than going 5 or 6 blocks through kind of local traffic and trash trucks and people pulling out with their SUVs and delivery trucks and all that. You want to get on the high-speed highway, I-29, as fast as you can. So there's some element of that Brook Hill development, the northern tier, that's going to come north on the connector road that they're going to put in that connects to Ashwood to use that stoplight to go south on 29. Well, you got to factor that in too. That's a couple hundred more houses, probably. A little hard to estimate, but we tried. So multiply that times 2, and you got another 400 cars there. So put it together, you got another 1,000 cars. Not that they all go to work during rush hour, but some fraction of them do. I guess there's some percentage that you can calculate and so forth. You put that on top of the traffic that's already there, a 60 to 80% increase on a traffic that's a 25-second light trying to get onto 29 in the morning.
Is that what concerns you the most, the traffic?
I think
Or what
so.
concerns you, the schools, the stormwater management? What concerns you the most?
Well, I think, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. If you had 1 or 2 of these things, you could deal with them, but you got like a dozen different issues that we identified.
Prioritize them in
Some
order
of them are
for
bigger
you.
than others, and not a perfect prioritization, but traffic is way up there. The aesthetics against Ashwood is, because you see that every day. The overhang against Ashland townhouses is up there, and those 2 things I think they fixed. But the traffic and the density and simply the scope of the thing. It's 4- and 5-story buildings. Now, I came down from there today, and you think, well, Brook Hill is pretty big. That's 3-story buildings in the front, tapered to 4-story buildings in the back. They got a whole cluster now of 4-story and 5-story buildings, 65 feet tall. The control tower, airplane control tower at Charlottesville Airport is only about 30, 35 feet high. You think a small town, maybe that would be a benchmark for how tall the buildings would be. Well, it's 50 to 100% higher than that. I mean, it's incredibly dense that way. You look at the plan and you don't see much green space. You pretty much see bedrooms and parking lots and a little bit of green space that they're required to have and a little bit of amenity space that they're required to have. But other than that, it's just buildings and parking lots.
As you know, I'm running for Board of Supervisors, and I'm trying to get engaged in the Scottsville District. And one of the hot button topics is Mountain View Elementary School. And the supervisors and the Planning Commission have approved density down southern Albemarle County that's making Mountain View Elementary beyond capacity, to the point that they're thinking about taking the 5th grade out of elementary and putting it in middle school because they cannot accommodate the 5th grade at the elementary school. That's an example of infrastructure not being up to speed with development approval.
Right.
The reason I'm throwing this to you is schools. We have yet to talk schools in northern Albemarle County.
Well, let's do that now. Brook Hill proffered an elementary school as part of their approval.
And explain to those that don't know what that means.
Proffer means that they legally offer the property for it to be used by the school
They're giving
district.
it
They're giving
as an
it.
approval
They're
to
giving
make
it.
this happen, this neighborhood.
They're giving it.
Yeah.
They also made land available, they thought, for another high school, I guess, or a specialty school or something over across on the other side of 29. Not clear to me what really is going on with that, but the important thing from our side is proffering that elementary school, because our local schools are pretty much at capacity, basically. And the school district and the county haven't really picked up on it particularly, but so when we did traffic calculations...
You, Forest Lakes?
When Forest Lakes did our traffic calculations, and ran basically scenarios of what the traffic might look like. Not only is it all the traffic coming on to Ashwood to try to get out west to get to 29 and the left turn lane. If you don't have the school at Brook Hill, then you have all those people with kids coming north there and turning on to Ashwood going east and in through to get up to Hollymead and Sutherland. So you've got another substantial traffic flow. By the way, some of them are going to turn around and come back home. So they got them coming back west on Ashwood. I mean, it's very complicated here. And you got to take all these things into consideration, I think, before you just sort of, blithely decide to approve some developer's, proposal.
Public transportation. Talk to me.
Well, there's none there, and there really isn't any work, any employment center, really. I mean, there's Hollymead Town Center that's retail, and that's up about a mile on the other side of the road as well. And then you got Walmart and Sam's and mostly retail further to the south, a mile or two. Yes, there's a sidewalk, but that's used mostly by people that, kind of super fit people that decide to ride their bike all the way to downtown Charlottesville.
That's
It's not me, not me. Maybe next year when I come back, I'll be part of that, but not there yet. But, it's not that you could walk to work any place. You got to have a car. This is a place that is going to have cars, and people get up in the morning or whatever time they do, and they're going to run down 29 to work at the hospital or the UVA or right down here on the downtown mall or something like that.
How much money has the Forest Lakes Neighborhood Association, Hollymead, and your lobbying group in totality? Because what you are is a lobbyist here. And this is a lobbying group. And you are the face of the franchise of the lobbying group. The Derek Jeter of the New York Yankees is Scott Elliff for this lobbying group. That's safe to say. That's fact.
Well,
how much
let
money?
me stop you there. I have no intention to be that. That was not the objective here.
But the reason you are is because you're good with your words, you're willing to put the time and the commitment in, and you're outspoken, and you don't mind giving your opinion. That's all safe to say.
I'm simply somebody that was willing to step up
Okay.
and that could do some analysis and look at things with a fresh eye.
How much money in totality has this lobbying group allocated to this?
Well, let's not call it a lobbying group. This is just
That's what this
is our local. This is a bunch of homeowners. These are homeowners who are affected by a potential development.
How much money in totality?
Well, we contracted for our own scenarios of traffic studies, and we contracted for some sketches of some alternative designs and some analysis of the issues of those designs, and the computer-generated photos to make it real for people and so forth. I don't know, $10,000 or $20,000 or so, which, by the way, is $10,000 or $20,000 more than anybody else spends on doing this kind of stuff.
So you guys are including March's effort and this effort now. You're 20K in.
Yeah, I think
you're
that's
20K pot committed.
That's probably about right, but that's kind of irrelevant to the discussion. I think what's more important to look at is we had 500 people sign the petition originally. We had 30 people with substantive 3-minute discussions with associated slides.
You went 3 times in March.
Well, somebody didn't show up, so I said his piece. I know I've got everybody all bent out of shape about that, but the idea is to try to convey the information efficiently, isn't it? And it was a lot of information, but it was actually conveyed very efficiently. Probably kind of broke the system because nobody does that level of detail and specificity and so forth.
I think that's safe to say.
I think there should be some level of respect for it, but also respect for the poor commissioners and public officials in general that have to sit there and listen to it forever. So,
sure. It's like Groundhog's Day for them.
So this time we have a half a dozen people that are going to speak, a small group that we got together, and we're just going to focus on the changes, what was good, what was bad, and what still isn't addressed, and what we think ought to happen.
Okay, so you guys are 20K in. This is the next question. Time commitment so far.
Oh my God, I can't possibly.
Try to characterize it.
Well,
you personally first, and then the group in totality.
Well, my time is free.
Well, your time is not free. There's the opportunity cost of your time.
Of course there is, but I'm not Derek Jeter either. So,
okay, you are a businessman.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Your time could be spent growing the business.
Well, I work 24/7. It seems like so. It doesn't
same
matter.
with me.
So,
same with me. So your time.
So that I'm not concerned about. But I've been working on this every day. I guess at least it's fair to say, since January probably.
Every day since January.
Yeah.
7 days a week.
Every 5 to 7 probably.
Okay, so we're
every
talking
day something.
190 days.
Talking to people, getting their input, doing
5 hours a
analysis.
day?
No, it's sometimes an hour maybe. Who knows?
Okay, let's be conservative and say 2.
Maybe.
190 times 2. 190 days at this point times 2, that's 380 hours. 380 hours divided by 40 hours a week. You're talking he's allocated 9.5 business work weeks to this.
Probably.
9.5.
Probably, but I don't care. I'm more interested and gratified that so many other people in the community have been involved. And they are looking to me to take their information and basically help package it and rationalize it and push it to conclusion and so forth. And that's a role I'm happy to play.
How about the group in totality?
Who knows? Can't even make an estimate.
That much.
But just think of how broad it's been. And now there's another round of comments going into the Planning Commission tonight, too. So somebody sits down and writes a thoughtful email, and I've been copied on a lot of them. They aren't just, I don't like it, get out of town. They explain why. They have paragraphs, sub-paragraphs. They reference things and so forth. People are putting in a lot of time and effort into this. It's a thoughtful process. And I'm, from that standpoint, I'm gratified by it. It's a lot of information for Planning Commission or a Board of Supervisors or the county staff or anybody to digest. But it's important, so that's why we bothered.
What do you say to the folks, I got to ask this question, okay? What do you say to the folks that this is NIMBYism, this is NIMBYism happening?
Well, it's not. We're not opposed to developing something on this site. Some of us were involved to a degree in the Places 29 plan. It's the county's strategy is to focus development in relatively few areas, and so 29 North is clearly one of them, and it's going to get developed or redeveloped, and that's fine. But don't go so over the top that it's negative for everybody, causes problems, out of scale, and sets a bad precedent. I mean, with the exception of Brook Hill, which is a little bit of a special case, this is, in essence, the first parcel on 29 North like this that's being developed. There are a lot of small sort of pocket parcels that a couple of them are for sale right now that somebody's going to want to develop. And that's fine, but let's do it right. Let's be proud of what we have at the end of this thing.
So for the sake of a talk show, for the sake of having both sides covered, okay, and I'm doing this in obviously a fair way here, we have a housing supply issue.
Yep.
We're both in agreement there, right?
Uh-huh.
This housing supply issue has manifested itself over decades.
Yep.
But it's now really crescendoing today. And it's crescendoing today because of the ramifications of COVID. We have people that may have been touched by Charlottesville and Central Virginia at their time at the University of Virginia. We have people that are fleeing from densely populated areas, coming to Central Virginia because of all the beautiful amenities we have. Fantastic vineyards.
There you
fantastic
go.
wineries.
Perfect, exactly.
Fantastic breweries.
People want to come to Charlottesville. We understand that.
They're working from ISPs, big city firms, working from ISPs here, maintaining big city salaries, and gobbling up the housing stock that was already limited. And they're essentially gentrifying exponentially this area, and they're pushing out the locals. I've been here 21 years. You've probably been here longer.
15.
15, okay. I've been here 21. They're pushing out people that were born and raised here or have been here 15 years, 21 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the comment I'm coming with this is, if the housing supply stock is so limited, does it not make sense to increase that stock to alleviate the real estate tax burden on current homeowners? Extra stock means spreading out the tax burden.
Well, I'm not sure how deep I want to go into this, but I don't even see it necessarily as a tax burden issue. I see it more that maybe this is too simplistic, but what everybody says is they'd like their teachers and their firefighters to live in the area.
Yeah.
Now that's a somewhat narrower category. I think they tend to call that workforce housing. You've been talking about what I think people call affordable housing, which is just to make sure that we have adequate diversity in our community and so forth. And not to mention people that do, service jobs, which we, interestingly, in the pandemic, we had an increasing respect for all those people that did service jobs, that normally don't get much.
Yeah, we needed them.
Don't much respect.
Right.
Yeah, guess what? Turns out that
important.
That's what makes things go on an everyday basis. So look, nobody's opposed to that either. I don't think there's much consensus as to what it ought to look like and whether it ought to be heavily, densely in one particular site, which this one is. Thing you haven't mentioned or I haven't mentioned is the developer added to his proposal kind of right before seeking review that a large share of the community would be designated affordable housing. And he's tweaked that a little bit, but that's still pretty much the case.
Walk me through that.
I think it's 75% of the apartments would be designated for affordable housing with certain parameters in terms of AMIs. I'm not following all of that exactly, but so the concept being, of course, that those were ones that they would be rentals and ones that people could rent at some reasonable rate, and that's fine. We don't really particularly have a position on that, except as it relates to whether they are service workers or millionaires, they're all getting in their car and coming onto the Ashwood and backing it up. I mean, our traffic study showed a 400-foot backup in the morning, like 5 light cycles, because only 6 cars get through in each lane on that. That's 10-minute delay for every person that leaves. And unsafe as well, because you have people cutting up and down and sideways and backwards flows if they don't have the Brook Hill School, as I mentioned, and all that kind of stuff. It's just over the top, doesn't make sense, needs to be basically rescoped to a more reasonable level.
What is the zoning of your home? It's got to be single-family R1.
Yeah.
It's 4 slates.
Well, I think it's called a planned urban development, so I think it can have more units per acre. I'm sure that it does. But the zoning in what they're asking for is to upzone from R1, which is what that trailer park is actually, up to a designation that is urban something, but it's 6 to 34 units per acre.
What does upzoning mean to you?
It means putting more units on something that was otherwise, didn't have much. But here's the thing. If you calculate their plan, I think they quote it as being 17 or 18 units per acre. And it's 4 and 5-story buildings. Well, where in the heck did 34 units per acre come from? If you did 34 units per acre, you'd have 6, 8, 10-story buildings, multiple level parking lots. It would be insane, I think. Now, if you drill down, I think that came up from Places 29 about a decade ago. But
Tell me what Places 29 is.
That's a kind of a sub-plan for the area, for the development area of 29 North, basically, as part of the overall comprehensive plan or master plan or whatever that's supposed to guide development. And so they pick all these different parcels and say this one can have this density, this one can have that density. Some of them can be commercial, some would be residential, some would be apartments, that type of thing.
A lot of comments coming in. I will get to these comments here in a matter of moments. I'm a talk show host in this setting, and it's my job to facilitate discussion and to discuss every angle and every side. So the other side of the coin, the other party that has the opposition view of you, and not just you personally, I mean the group in totality. Okay, Scott has the courage and the gumption and the willingness to do this, and not everybody does. And that courage and gumption should not be marginalized, underestimated. Not many people are willing to do this. You often catch heat, and I know firsthand, dude, doing what I do.
I'm sure you do.
Tremendous heat when you give your opinion on a daily basis about things that are ballsy.
Yeah.
Okay, you know firsthand. You're calling some heat.
Sure.
Have you caught heat?
There's a little distinction, though. I don't mean to mischaracterize it, but sometimes you want to be a little controversial because people watch you as a result. I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm trying to just represent the facts of the situation as it relates to everyday homeowners that are in the adjoining neighborhoods and what impacts this would have on us and on quality of life.
Fair. Okay, my response to this is the other side of the coin is saying you have what they call a lobbying group. You disagree with that term?
I told you already.
Yeah, you disagree with that term?
It's a bunch of homeowners.
Tomato.
Not
you
even.
disagree with that term? Okay. This is the question I have for you is, the other side, your opposition says you have a couple hundred, if not more, close to 1,000, whatever the number is. I mean, good night. I'm looking at the numbers right now, and you have Hollymead, Forest Lakes. You got, what was the number here? You got 2,000 plus housing units, 6,000 plus residents. This is a hell of a lot of people here.
It is.
And the opposition says you got 6,000 people that already have the American dream, a home that they own, anywhere from $300K to $1 million plus, and they're opposing the American dream in a community that needs more housing stock.
Well, no, I don't think that's
what the opposition says.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind here, and we dug up some statistics, is a think tank in town, Weldon Cooper, I think it is. You know them probably. They did a projection of the housing needs for this area over the next 40 years, and they came up with about 10,000 new units. Okay, 40 years, maybe it's 20 years. I hate to be wrong about it, but anyway, pretty far out, okay? How many new units do you think are already approved and in some level of being built?
Tell me.
Right now.
Tell me.
Over 8,000.
Okay.
So we've got a lot in the pipeline. And by the way,
You're saying the housing stock is keeping up with population growth. That's what you just said.
Population growth will fill up the housing units that are available.
Okay, tomato, tomato.
But it's not like, look, we don't have anything else going, and this is the only apartment being built. They're being built all over the place. So I don't know the situation in those other ones and whether they have some sort of level of affront against local neighbors and neighborhoods or not. All I know is ours, and that it has some issues.
What do you say to the folks? It's the urban ring. This is where the growth is supposed to happen.
Well, that's policy.
It's a designated growth area.
Yeah, I know. And like I said, we're not opposed to having something developed in it. Where did 34 units per acre come from? You really want 10-story buildings there? I don't think so. You want clusters of 4- and 5-story buildings with minimal green space and minimal amenities? Yes, it meets the county minimum, barely. But is that attractive? Is that what we want, even if it's quote-unquote allowable? Actually, what they're doing in Crozet, and you probably know it better than I do, is they've had similar issues, and they said, you know what, we need a little different zoning category. We need some sort of transitional zoning between established residential neighborhoods and new developments, so you don't put some dense, tall, traffic-oriented place right next to the existing neighborhoods. And it looks like what they've come up with is a zoning designation of 2 to 12 units per acre. Now, that would be probably pretty good for around here. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, probably by our community advisory committee and other groups and so forth, to start to have a look at that and figure out how we ought to make appropriate adjustments. It's not zero, but it's kind of reasonable and in keeping with the rest of the community.
Okay. Kevin Cox has this comment. Kevin Cox says, local governments have deliberately limited the supply of residential zone land in order to drive up the value of real estate and thus the amount of real estate taxes collected. This is why this project is so dense and congested. Exclusionary zoning is an intrinsic part of the city and the county's land use policies. From the 1980 Albemarle County Comprehensive Plan, and it is still true today, even more so today. Land prices have been influenced by the county's growth management policy, which controls the extent and location of development, thus limiting land available to meet residential market demands and increasing the price of available land. He continues with more. Thoughts on some of the stuff I said?
Well, two things. One, I'm probably not that deep a thinker on it, I guess. I'm not sure it was all sort of secretly planned and executed in some way or another. But the reason that strikes me for the kind of plan and strategy that we have is preserve the rural areas. And my gosh, it's so beautiful in so much of the county that you hate to see that urban sprawl develop and take over all those farms and beautiful views and so forth. So I'm sympathetic to the idea of limiting growth to specific areas. But that doesn't mean the growth should go wild in those areas. It should be, kind of reasonable and recognize that there are existing communities that have been there for a long time and shouldn't devalue them just for being able to put in more units.
Planning Commissioner Rick Randolph in March characterized this, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm paraphrasing pretty accurately, as warehousing people during the day, and made an allusion to Cabrini Green in Chicago,
yes,
which Rick Randolph, in retrospect, probably regrets saying that because he caught a hell of a lot of shit for making that comment.
Well, I grew up in Chicago suburbs, and I'm old enough that I remember that. That's one of those.
You remember that comment from Rick?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I was impressed with his forthrightness, frankly. He says he's from St. Louis, so the reference is to some similar kind of project in the downtown St. Louis area, but same vintage, 70s or whatever. Cabrini Green was a huge failure of a massive low-income development, put everybody, warehouse them there, and ultimately that got the wrecking ball and has been completely redeveloped. So, hopefully we're not looking at anything close to that, but I thought that was an important comment. And in fact, when you think about it, if you were to live there, you're in this apartment building, you're pretty much living there because you can get on 29 quick to get downtown, and you can get to shopping up and down the road and so forth. You're not living there to stroll the rest of the 20 acres, which is parking lot, and a little bit of tree buffer on the corners, and a little pool and a half basketball court. You're doing it because it's in a way it's very convenient for getting to and from work, even though it's inconvenient in that there's not really any amenities or parks or anything kind of right on your property or right next door.
Questions coming via Twitter. Breezy Hill, Southern Development, Charlie Armstrong,
Right.
Elliff.
Yeah.
Throw this to you.
Yeah.
Breezy Hill and what's transpired in Keswick seems to have given you a leverage point. Tell me how.
Well, I hope so.
Do you agree with that statement?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it gives us maybe more hope here and optimism, because they had something. I'm sure the situation is somewhat different, but they had something where they proposed basically more density than was either allowed or desirable or something, and it got rejected by the Planning Commission. They came back again with a small change, just like RST has kind of a small net change, and it was rejected by the Planning Commission again. I think nonetheless they went to the Board of Supervisors, and it was denied there also. And now I saw, whatever it was, a press release or something that said, guess what, we're reworking the plan, and we're going to substantially reduce the development, the density, and come back with it.
And it's from Charlie Armstrong.
So it's hopeful from this. Is that the head of the
Charlie
the
and Frank
builder?
are Southern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so what that tells me is the process works. That democracy works. Let's hear the music or something. But that if you take a stand and you push hard and you're right and appropriate on it, then ultimately appropriate adjustments are made. I hope so. That's the whole idea here.
I'll throw a hypothetical to you. You just outlined Breezy Hill and Southern and the opposition they had from a neighborhood in eastern Albemarle County, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You just outlined what happened fairly well. If what happens in northern Albemarle County does not go how eastern Albemarle County went, what do you think?
Well, then you got a bunch of big eyesore, heavy density buildings causing a lot of traffic backup, and you've created a precedent that the next developer, whoever it is going to have the next parcel and say, you did it for them, do it for me.
And take it a step further.
And we come back after our 10-year sail around the world trip and find out that entire corridor is 4 and 5-story buildings that are hard up against existing residential communities. And we look and say, you know what? Did I make a wrong turn? Is this Fairfax instead? That's the issue.
Kevin, routes 53, 20, 29, 250, and 64 are jam-packed with people who saw the dramatic difference in cost between urban Charlottesville, Albemarle, and the surrounding counties. Kevin Cox, we appreciate your comments today. If it is denied by the Planning Commission on eastern Albemarle County and manages to get approved in northern Albemarle County, that is a reflection of what?
I don't know. It's a hypothetical. I mean, all we're doing is making our point heard, and hopefully that'll be.
That could happen.
Well, we'll wait and see what happens. Is what we're going to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to throw this to you here. I'm actually choosing my words carefully. It's rare that I do that. You've got Holly Meads Citizens Association, the Forest Lakes Community Association. You guys have outlined infrastructure, schools, quality of life. You've made a comparison to Breezy Hill. You've talked affordable housing. You've indicated you're not opposed to affordable housing. You have identified the effects on stormwater management. We've covered schools extremely well. What are we missing?
Well, there is one more as I go through the laundry list a little bit. And I'm pretty new to this, and I don't know all the super details of the plans. I've learned a lot about traffic, by the way. Learned a lot about traffic studies. Maybe we can come back to that, too, because I think we need some change in the way that we use traffic studies to inform decision-making. But hold that thought for a second. But we look at all these plans and architectural renderings and everything, and, we're commenting on the basis of what we see on those plans. So we do our analysis, and people comment, and we pull it all together and everything. And then you look on the fine print of those sheets submitted by the developer, and it says conceptual only, illustrative, not to scale. It means that I'm not confident that even when we push on something that we necessarily have a firm commitment. Now, you asked me for the definition of proffer earlier. I think proffer is a legally...
This guy's going to take some photos of you, so give us your best pearly white smile over there. There we go. That's a good one right there. Thank you, Judah Wickhauer, for taking this photo. Go
All
ahead
right,
with
that's
proffer.
good. Okay. And proffers, again, I'm not the lawyer on it either, but proffers are legally binding. And I'm gathering that, you see all these plans that we're commenting on and maybe approving or denying or changing or whatever. But if they're stamped all over the place, draft, illustrative, conceptual, then what are we looking at? The worst case scenario is somebody says, yeah, well, that was just an artist rendering and we came back and did something different, or, we actually decided to not keep the buffers, or we changed the configurations or whatever. And even though you thought you got to a reasonable point, turns out you didn't.
Do you think RST is true to its word?
I don't know either way. This is the first time. I don't know them, never met the guy personally or
Do you
anything.
trust RST?
I have no basis for trusting or distrusting. It's just a guy. You look at his stuff on paper and you react to it.
Who's the rep locally? Is it Shrimp Engineering?
Bowler, I believe, was the firm originally.
Okay.
Don't know them either. Don't know the traffic study guys that they used. We used another firm because it was important that we used another firm, but another reputable group, and they used the same underlying VDOT model and everything. It's not personal here. This is just homeowners wanting to have a good life where they live and not get overloaded by an inappropriately large, dense development that's going to overflow and affect everybody's daily life.
How did the dues increase? HOAs?
Oh, well, we actually, you can compare us pretty favorably to the federal government and the state government and the county government and everything else. We basically have had limited or no dues increases in Forest Lakes for years.
How'd you pay the $20K?
Huh?
How'd you cover the $20K?
We have enough money.
Oh, in the
We have enough
coffers.
money.
So you took it from the coffers.
Yeah, it's in the budget. It's fine.
Is it shared with Hollymead, or is it primarily Forest Lakes?
Hollymead's a separate entity. We took the lead on this, but we work collaboratively together. There are other things that they do.
And how
as
much
well.
has Hollymead kicked in?
So I don't know.
Okay.
And that's not even a concern.
Okay.
But again, I'm not comfortable with the direction. This is not personal. Has nothing to.
I think we know that.
It's nothing to do with any of these players. It's what's on paper and what would it look like if it was built and what effects would it have. And I think you just need to have an honest discussion of the impacts of that and make appropriate decisions.
We're doing that here?
Yeah.
Yeah. You think
Yeah.
I've been fair, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to feel.
Yeah, you're pushing buttons a little bit. It's a good thing.
No,
So that's fine.
And you're
Okay.
responding well. You're good
Yeah.
with your words.
So.
You're good with your words. All right, I'm going to throw this to you. We have Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services, to talk markets here in a matter of moments. Before we do, we're going to wrap up with Scott. Scott, tonight at 6 o'clock, what are we going to expect?
Well, I don't know how it goes exactly, but for our part, we have a half a dozen people that are going to summarize the comments, what we thought was better, what we thought was worse, what's unchanged, what's not good, some of the other considerations around the whole business here, and ask for it to be denied, and for them to go back to the drawing board, which I thought they were doing last time, to rescope the project. And again, they did it in a couple of ways that were helpful and in the good direction, and they should get kudos for that. But they haven't addressed the essence of the big issues here.
What would you tell, this is a personal question for me, what would you tell someone like me who has announced that he is going to run for Board of Supervisors?
I'd say that we need to have a coffee and go over this in a little bit more detail.
Or a glass of wine.
There you go, or a glass of wine, so we can understand our position better. It's been a while since our community has worked with the Board of Supervisors. It was back at the time of the famous bypass and some other things and so forth. So there's been a lot of turnover since then. But when the time comes, we'll certainly work with them. And if you're one of them, that's great. We'll want to reach out to you. Same thing. Here's the facts. Here's our case. Here's our point of view. Here are the things you ought to consider.
If this gets to the Board of Supervisors, you're going to need, RST will need a 4-2 vote minimum. 3-3 is no. 4-2 is yes.
Okay.
A tie means it doesn't get approved.
Okay.
Okay?
Which is what happened with Breezy Hill, I believe. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
exactly what
Yeah.
happened with Breezy Hill.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. So from a 4-2 standpoint, I would think in your strategy, you've identified the 4 potentially that would say yes to this.
To tell you the truth, we haven't even gotten that far. We would certainly. You can tell that I try to think about these things thoughtfully.
You think about it like a businessman.
and
Yeah.
strategically.
Yeah, I
But
can tell.
right now we're in front of Planning Commission, So we're making our case to the Planning Commission.
So you're basically saying let's not put the cart before the
No,
horse.
let's stop it. Let's stop it there and get them to go back and rework it and make it right. We would love to be in a position with a refined plan to say, yes, we would agree to this, and that would be fine, and you've addressed our concerns. I think the only way that can happen is if you significantly reduce the number of units or redesign it in some kind of creative way. But if you did that, we would welcome a redevelopment of that site. If it has affordable housing or doesn't have affordable housing, or whatever the level, that's fine too. The point is, it's got to be, reasonable, appropriate, matched to the community, and not have externalities, outside problems that it results in, like traffic and like schools and like stormwater management and like all these things. Give us comfort, make it right.
You get the final word. Anywhere you want to go.
Appreciate having the opportunity here.
Anytime you want.
We're just a little local community association and homeowners trying to continue to enjoy the nice setup that all of us have here in Albemarle and not turn it into Fairfax.
Do you feel like it was a fair interview?
Good. I appreciate you having me.
Though?
Yeah.
I
Good.
try to make it fair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. J-Dubs, if we could see Scott out. We're now going to go to Alex.
All right. Beautiful.
Thank you kindly for joining us.
Okay.
We appreciate that. J-Dubs, I'm going to reach out to Alex if you want to go studio camera and get ready for Mr. Urpí, and then we can get Scott in the right spot, J-Dubs. So Scott Elliff, guys, we'll follow that closely. It'll be all over tonight's 6 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. newscast, in the newscast tomorrow, certainly in the Daily Progress. We see the media outlets watching the program literally as we speak. I am now reaching out to the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Are you still on?
Yeah, we're still on. Yeah, we're still on.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Alex Urpí on the line, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. Alex, anything from the interview there intrigue you?
It's very interesting. It's one of those classic. I was listening to the whole interview since 12:30 during my lunch hour, and it's always fascinating. It's always the counterplay between growth and the lifestyle that you have at a certain point, and balancing them can be hard for a lot of people because you want growth as a community, right? But growth entails growth. When it's not per capita, when it's just like growing the economic basis of Charlottesville, entails more people coming in, which changes things, which means more housing, which means more traffic. And as someone who lived in New York and has visited a lot, traffic for me means different than what traffic is for Charlottesville. But I can understand when you've lived in Charlottesville and there's a certain level of just total population that you're used to, it can be a big change. It's all about balancing, I think, the needs of different people. So it'll be interesting to see, just as long as everyone has their voice heard, it'll be interesting to see what happens with it.
Well said. Alex Urpí, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. I want to talk a lot of stuff with you. Let's go some commodities and lumber prices. Lumber prices are at I want to say a 6-month low. We're under $1,000. Was it per 1,000 feet? That metric, I might be not saying that metric exactly right. Basically, what it comes down to is lumber prices have dipped below 1,000, and they're getting a little bit more manageable from a cost standpoint. This topic for you, Alex Urpí.
No, it's. I think what we're seeing is, remember, I think Xavier and I have been saying this for a little while, that part of the inflation we're seeing isn't just demand, it's also a supply issue. And I think as supply gets resolved and the supply chains, it's the number one thing. There was an interesting interview I saw just today with the CEO, I think the COO of a major lumber company. And he was saying, this isn't just even a question of supply in terms of the cost of lumber when you're building homes. You're talking about the ability to get the orders that you put in to receive them. But sometimes they're putting in orders for lumber and it's like, well, sorry, it's not showing up today. And so just the supply chain has really been struggling. And my hope is that we're seeing, as the supply chain comes back online and gets into order, we've seen, I think it's about a 20% decline off the highs of lumber prices, which of course will then translate into, I think, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the home building inflation.
Why is home builder sentiment down today?
I think it's a combination of things. I think sentiment, people do look at inflation and it affects their sentiment. I mean, one of the major things of both consumer and producer sentiment is inflation expectations. Not even current inflation is one of the basic things you think for in economics. A lot of people look at current inflation. But in reality, what drives decision making is inflation expectations. What do I think it's going to be tomorrow? All right, and obviously what happens today affects my thinking of tomorrow, but I think they're looking forward. They're just seeing still the supply chain issues, still the questions. I know I've talked to a lot of contractors. I even have one friend who said he's on the verge of when he builds his, when he works on his porch, he might even go plastic wood because that, I forget what it's called. Like the
You're talking Trex?
Trex.
Yeah, that's expensive.
He might even go Trex because it was cheaper than the wood he was looking at.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So he's like, I might go Trex because if I try to build this out of actual wood, it's going to cost me more. And so I think just even in the construction industry, when you're looking at A, what I'm trying to purchase is expensive, the supplies I need, the raw materials I need, and B, I don't know if I'm going to receive them on time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find what I'm looking for. I think it translates into sentiment. Is this worth it? Am I actually going to get my return because now my costs have increased so much?
All right. This is a broad question for you, and I'm curious where you're going to go with this. Has the Fed managed inflation, perceived inflation, and actual inflation the right way? And I'm gonna add a back end to this.
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to impact not only us in real time, but my little boy down the road? We're accruing a hell of a lot of debt here. How's it going to impact eventually the next generation of Urpís down the road? Anywhere you want to go on that?
It's a tough one. I think it's two. I would say I'm going to split it into two different answers because I think the long term is less about the Fed and more about just the fiscal policy of debt, and the short term is the Fed. And I think my suspicion is if you think about the Federal Reserve over the last 20 years, I think it seems to me the number one issue that we have had is they persist in things too long. Namely, basically, there's almost a kind of arrogance, I think, where, well, if we just change the interest rate today, the discount rate, well, that'll solve inflation tomorrow. And if history tells us anything in economics is that there is a lag. In other words, by the time you see the impact of a decrease or an increase in interest rates that was done today, you're talking 6 months to potentially a year down the road. I mean, we didn't realize that we were in the Great Recession until about a year in. They start seeing, oh my goodness, there were actually negative quarters a year ago. And it just didn't show up. It had to be, as they looked at the revisions, they looked back and said, oh my goodness, this is when the recession started, and we didn't even realize it at the time. And so my concern is that the Federal Reserve is consistently a little bit behind the eight ball. And my suspicion as to why this is that I think that there are other things on their mind at this point besides the two main goals that they have written in there, which are keep employment stable and high and keep price levels stable. In other words, don't cause too much inflation. And my suspicion is that a third one has been added in there, which is do not cause the United States Treasury to have to pay exorbitant interest on its debt. And I think that's part of the calculation that's in place here. And we've seen a little, I might even add a fourth one, which is they seem to have added don't spook the stock market. Because we frequently will see a statement from the Federal Reserve, if the stock market panics a little, a statement from the Fed that's the equivalent of, don't worry, we'll keep the money supply going, we'll keep giving these really low interest rates so that you can borrow from us and then go and buy your own stock. Exactly. And I think that is playing into this. And I think that's what erodes the trust in the Federal Reserve as an institution. As far as the long-term perspective, that's so much harder to say because I'm going to be honest with you, we are at the point with our unfunded liabilities of the United States that economics would tell us we should have already hit the wall by now. We should already be seeing some kind of significant drag just from a theoretical perspective, significant drag on growth. We should have been seeing high inflation in 2009, 2010, 2011, when the balance sheet of the Fed went from in the billions to 4 trillion in one shot. I mean, they created basically the equivalent of multiple nations' economies out of thin air. And so you sit there and theoretically you looked at this and say, something should have hit the fan a while ago, and people should have reacted, but it hasn't happened. And there's a similar thing happened in Japan. I mean, the Japanese basically 10 years ago said, we are committing to printing unlimited money to keep our bond market afloat. And you looked at that and say, economic theory says hyperinflation. Economic theory says Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Weimar Germany, and it didn't happen in Japan. And so you sit there and say, well, has something fundamental changed, whereby the way people worked, the fact that we all use digital banking, we all use credit cards, we're no longer really hoarding cash in our mattresses or in our basements. We're not really going out and buying physical gold and storing it in our, in our fridges and stuff like that. We're not hiding, precious metals anymore. Just the way we are as an economy now, you do begin to wonder, does it actually matter anymore? Does the extremely exorbitant debt load actually have an impact on the economy? And if the answer is no, then I think I'm in good shape. Your son's going to be in good shape, because I do believe that, there will be growth. The United States can grow. There's the people here, there's so many good people in the United States that I think start their businesses. We work hard, we employ people, we produce growth. So if that massive debt load, if something has changed and the theory is wrong, and the way our economy is now, it doesn't matter anymore, then I think we're fine. If the theory one day proves to be right, and it's just at a much higher number than we thought it was, then you're talking, very significant slowdown in the economy, because debt slows down the economy, especially unproductive debt. And I think that's always the fear. Because I mean, you know this as a businessman, right? Sometimes you take on debt
to grow
in the form of a loan, but you're leveraging the positivity of your business. You're leveraging what you can do to produce growth. So it's really productive debt, because it's enabling you to reach a point of growth where you can employ more people, you can make more revenues, you can pay back that debt, and now your company is at a larger and more successful place. So there's productive debt, and then there's unproductive debt. And the question is, how much of the latter are we looking at here, where we're just saying, well, I want growth at any price, even if it's all debt fueled and there's no underlying business to it. And that's what can become dangerous debt.
This hombre is brilliant. Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. How do you characterize today's economy?
Today, so it strikes me as an economy that is moving in the right direction. I think it's in recovery.
You say fragile?
It is. I don't think it's that fragile. I think it is coming back, and I think what we're moving out of is a phase of just so much uncertainty. That's what I think this is. Supply shocks of the time we're seeing, that speaks to me of uncertainty. Uncertainty, maybe some bad incentives, and we are keeping some of the incentives to stay home too long. But I think you just look around, and I do see a lot of growth positivity, in the sense of people, particularly businesses, saying, all right, I now have some positive things to look forward to. I have more people coming in my doors. I have more people talking to me. I have more people that I'm meeting on the street and getting to know. So I mean, I can only speak to what I see in the markets and in the Main Street in Charlottesville, and I see growth on the horizon, and it doesn't strike me as that fragile. But I think the key thing is, can we make sure that we have the right incentives in place? Can we make sure we don't put a monkey wrench in the wheels of the economy in terms of just how we respond to the lingering pandemic?
What would be one of those monkey wrenches? Increasing rates too fast, too soon?
I think increasing rates too fast, too soon. Definitely, I think the unemployment, at some point you have to say, well, we can't do too much. We can't have that extra level of unemployment and extended. I mean, I know it's being extended to September, but you don't want to sit there and say, no, let's go another 2-3 years out and really incentivize, because people are rational animals. You incentivize us to stay home and not work, and you make it more valuable to stay home, then we'll stay home. So I think as long as we keep the right incentives there, and definitely I would say let's be cognizant of what does small business need. The small business is what's going to drive us out of this thing and make it, I think, a sustainable long term. We saw that big business does well when things are really bad, as it did last year. The really big businesses did really well, even though things were really bad. I think for things to go well into the future, you got to have those small businesses back if local economies are going to grow. So let's not put any monkey wrenches that make it harder for small business and local business to compete with big business.
Well said. Alex Urpí, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. I'm going to ask you about BlackRock in a second, and of course about UVA baseball and the College World Series. This man bleeds orange and blue. We got to ask him about Today y Mañana, Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. on this network. BlackRock is buying single-family detached homes and essentially warehousing them. What do you make of hedge funds buying homes in America?
It's funny. I know there's a tendency to think, and maybe because it's institutional investors seem so large and Wall Street seems so large, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that they make markets rather than respond to markets. And my suspicion in this case is that BlackRock is responding to markets. In other words, if there's no money to be made by investing in single-family homes, BlackRock's not going into that business. So what that's telling me is that they're seeing areas where there's not enough homes. There's a mismatch between demand and supply, and they're saying, okay, I'm going in. Because there's a profit to be made when there's a mismatch between demand and supply. If everything was perfectly balanced, I find it hard to think that BlackRock's best return strategy would be, well, let's throw this housing market out of whack by going in and buying a bunch of homes. There's the only marginal return to be made. So it seems to me that what we're seeing is BlackRock and some of these hedge funds seeing maybe a marketplace issue in certain places where there's not enough homes to compete with demand, and going in there and saying, okay, I want a piece of this to make some money. And it's funny, Xavier mentioned to me this, ironically, the opposite of 2008, when the hedge funds went in there and the institutional investors went in to buy homes that were so low in value because nobody else wanted them. Because the housing market had crashed. A lot of institutions were going in there saying, well, nobody wants this home because they think the value is going to go down. I'm going to buy it and then just wait it out and sell it. And this seems to me a little bit the opposite. This is BlackRock saying, well, home value prices are going up. I'm going to go in here, buy this, rent it, make some money in this sense. So, I mean, granted, we always have to watch the institutions, I think, to make sure that they're not negatively affecting local areas. But my suspicion in this case is what we're seeing is Wall Street's movements are telling us something about the market rather than creating the market.
This dude is so smart, guys. Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services, UVA baseball, and then Today y Mañana, Alex.
I'm so thrilled about UVA baseball. We were watching it because I saw one game with you when we made it to out of the regionals. I was on with you last week, and then I think it was just yesterday, watching flipping the phone, checking the score, and seeing, oh my goodness, the grand slam by Kyle Teal, and that grand slam came out of nowhere. I was like, oh my goodness, and I love the video of just the hustle of that kid. He swings so hard on that pitch, his helmet almost comes off to that grand slam. Just really nice to see them really play hard, win all these elimination games. I'm hoping they have the magic to go all the way, but it's really fun to see. I'm a big fan of all sports UVA.
Me too, dude. Me too. I think this may be Brian O'Connor's best coaching job since he's arrived in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. And yes, I'm aware he has won a national championship. This team was left out to dry. They were 4-11 in ACC play, and now in the College World Series. Today y Mañana, Thursday at 10:15 a.m. Alex Urpí, give us the nitty-gritty.
It's going to be a blast. So we're going to have on, thanks, you helped make the connection, Katie Travieso Pearl. She is a real estate
She's
agent
Cubana.
of Cuban descent. She is Cubana. So my dad and I are going to talk real estate, Cuban heritage, what it means, like how the immigrant family background. She has some great stories, I can tell you. I chatted with her on the phone just yesterday in prep for the show. She has some great stories about just how the immigrant story of coming to the United States, even if it's like your past, because I was born in the U.S., but my father's from Cuba. She was born here as well, but her parents are from, her father's from Cuba.
Just like me.
How that immigrants, just
Yeah.
like you, born here, but when you have that immigrant background, there's just so many great stories that really inspire you. They encourage you. They give you that kind of drive to persevere, because you hear what your parents and grandparents have come through to get here to the United States. And I think it just makes you incredibly grateful for the United States. It's that really that place where there's nowhere else to go. Like for a lot of people, when you came from Cuba, like my grandparents, it's like, well, you just lost your homeland again. There's no place to go except the United States, which will accept you there. And then just the opportunity to really grow your business, but the drive to really work hard and achieve it. And I think that comes into play. So we're going to talk a lot about that, I think, with Katie, a lot about what she sees with the real estate market in Charlottesville, what it's like working here. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be awesome, guys. 10:15 a.m. on Thursday, Today y Mañana, with Alex and the very affable and lovable and intelligent Xavier Urpí. We cannot wait for that show. I will see you on Thursday morning.
See you Thursday morning. Thanks. It's been a lot of fun. This was a great show today.
Thank you,
Enjoyed it.
Alex. You have a good one.
You too.
He's exactly right. And I'm going to close with this. Judah, we got a conference call in T-minus 4.5 minutes. My mom, born in Cuba, her parents, Mima and Papi, come from Cuba to Miami, Florida, where they leave an upper middle class lifestyle. And Mima and Papi go to being a hotel maid. Mima, Papi, a variety of jobs, including ditch digger and barber. My mom put in the 3rd grade in an English-speaking school without being able to speak English, was ridiculed mercilessly. You bring up that 3rd grade experience with her today. She's almost 71 years old, and she still gets emotional when we talk 3rd grade and English-speaking kids going up to her, ridiculing her because she could not speak the language, English. She had no idea what they were saying, but she knew that she was being made fun of. My mom finished with a 2-year degree from a community college. While going to the community college, she was working the entire time to help support Mima and Papi because they were not earning the wages they were accustomed to earning, and that's what they had to do to pay their mortgage. My mom was working at a local bank at the time. My father, a CPA, working for Arthur Andersen. Yes, that Arthur Andersen from Enron fame. He's traveling the East Coast, auditing banks, working alongside banks. My mom had made her way up to front of the house teller manager. She managed the tellers, my mom did. So she worked alongside my dad. 3 weeks after they met, after a handful of chaperone dates, my dad proposed to my mom. This story gets me emotional. The story gets me emotional. When you see the sacrifice that your mom and your grandparents make, it sticks with you. And it's hard not to work hard for your family because of what you saw growing up. I can't wait for Thursday's interview, Alex. That's the I Love CVille Show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you for joining us.